And welcome back to the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian O'Neill, joined by my sister, Tara, clinical hypnotherapist, certified life coach, and yoga instructor. Today, we are absolutely honored to welcome Drew Hanson, a licensed teacher of the Orosenke tradition of Japanese tea with nearly 30 years of experience. As the founder of Bokakuan Japanese Tea House and Garden, Drew has dedicated his life to preserving and sharing the art of the Japanese tea ceremony, a practice deeply rooted in mindfulness, ritual, and presence. Throughout this episode, we'll explore how chado, the way of tea, is more than just a tradition. It's a path of inner stillness, harmony, and self-discovery. Drew will guide us toward the philosophy behind chado, the power of ritual in everyday life, and how the principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility can transform the way we live. So whether you're new to the practice or a longtime seeker of mindfulness or just curious, this conversation is going to have a ton for all our listeners and viewers. Without any further ado, Drew, welcome aboard.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. It's really something that we've been looking forward to for a while. So to go a little bit behind the fourth wall, we had wanted to we have a mutual acquaintance, and I know we just had discussed we had passed the 50 podcast milestone not too long ago, and we had been expanding to kind of more nuanced parts of the spirit of the mind, body, spirit that we like to explore here at Your One Self and Journey to Your Best Self. And we had gotten some guests who are knowledgeable about, a lot of Eastern philosophy and traditions and religion, things like that. But we hadn't delved into anything in the Far East, and asked our acquaintance, being she's Japanese, and she immediately thought, I have the man for you. This is the interview you have to have. She said, Drew Hanson, but first you have to go visit him. And I didn't know that much about Japanese tea ceremony. And can you kind of give a little bit overview, of that experience for those maybe that the uninitiated, so to speak, and maybe we can go from you giving us a little background about that and kind of a primer, and then go from there. So people have a little bit of background knowledge.
Sure. In the West, we refer to our practice as the Japanese tea ceremony. And I mean, that works well for most Westerners. But in point of fact, we look at it more as a ritual. And, our lives are filled with rituals. Our daily lives are filled with rituals. This just happens to be another one. It is a ritualized preparation and serving of tea to a guest or guests. It is an act of sharing a moment that will never, ever happen again. And so we try to enrich each moment in the preparation and serving of the tea with intention and really kind of a specific focus on preparing and serving the best possible bowl of tea that I am capable of making at this time, because it will never, ever happen again.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. So we want to share that Brian and I had the privilege of visiting, and we had the experience, and it was absolutely amazing. And it really speaks to the notion that there only ever is this moment. So it really brings the power of the now into it. And just you saying that they're going to have that experience allowed me, and I believe allows a lot of people to really hone in on that present moment. Do you find that to be true, that you are setting the stage for them to really be intentional, to be present, and to be in the now?
Yes, I do. And over the years that I've been doing this for public demonstrations, whether they are here at Bokakuan or whether we do them off-site, and we do those, we find that people really do focus in on what is being presented. And I think I may have mentioned to you when you were here that the way of tea is a very sensual experience. And so we ask you again, in that present moment, to allow all 5 of your senses to be as active as they possibly can. Because the more you can engage your senses in what I, as the host, am doing, the richer your experience is going to be. Because you smell things, you taste things, you hear things, you see things, and you feel things. And I think I may have mentioned this to you as well. We Americans right now, in this present moment, do not give ourselves permission to be fully present. We're always on a schedule, and we're always thinking about what is coming next, rather than fully inhabiting each moment. And that's essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, before Tara gets back in here, I had tried to kind of relay the experience to or give my little view of your garden and everything. Was very like excited and supportive, curious. But I did have one conversation with somebody who was trying to say there's, 150 plus, there's so many steps that go along with it. There's so much of the process that happens even before the tea is introduced. And that's a small part of it in some ways, even though it's the focal point in other ways. And they were so removed from really understanding and so stuck in the I could just get a cup of tea at the drive-through at Dunkin' Donuts. What do you
Right.
mean? I don't need to commit 90 minutes to being served, in the middle of winter. And that's a tough one. That's a tough person to really get this across to. What is your kind of sales elevator pitch for somebody that you meet that you think that it would be a really great experience for?
Well, I've tried a number of different ways of doing this. And basically, what I do is invite them to give themselves up for an hour or an hour and a half and stop thinking about what they're going to prepare for dinner or what's on the agenda for tomorrow. And let's just try be here. And I try to bring in the idea that the tea house and our tea house and most freestanding tea houses like ours is situated in the landscape in a very, very particular way to take advantage of the flow of energy. And the flow of energy, if you will allow it, can affect you, and it will allow you to empty your mind of all of your agenda and just be there for that time. And so many people who come here at the end don't realize how much time has passed because they have accepted the challenge, as it were, to give it up, and just be there. And I had a couple last week, for example, who drove down from Scranton, Pennsylvania to experience this for their 3rd wedding anniversary. And they went away feeling totally renewed, and there's no other way to explain it except that the intentionality of everything directed toward them. And as I've said to you, I'm there to serve. That's my purpose. And serving them is my greatest joy. And so when that works, it really works.
Yeah, for those listening, can confirm everything that you're saying because, we were just there. A lot of times, we're going off the word sometimes of the guest and their credibility. But this one is, definitely validated. Anecdotally, we have direct evidence that experience, at least for me, I mean, it is like you're outside of space time when you're in the tea house. You would definitely say there's a transcendent component to it, prompted by Drew, and with the care of the creation of the house itself and the process. It is incredible. Tara, I kind of cut you off there. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask Drew to give a little visual for our listeners of, first of all, how how beautiful the property is, and I mean the energy right away is designed, you know, in a very particular way, and so right away there's a presence of that chi, that universal energy. And then as they go to the tea house, can you mention some of the elements of the serenity that you've created, almost in a feng shui type of way?
Yeah, that's very true. Our garden is an American garden because that's where we are. But we designed it based upon Japanese garden design principles, which are very different from the types of gardens that most Americans are, with. The structure of the garden comes first. We build a structure first, and then that structure is populated with plant materials which are complementary to the structure. And so we typically use basically shrubs and trees so that our garden, which is made up basically of broadleaf and needle evergreens, the garden is always green, no matter what time of year you come here. Now, they're all shades of green, but it's green. In the warmer season, there is color in the garden. And all of that, as you enter the garden, you are kind of confronted, and I'll say this, during the growing season, as it were, you are confronted with color. And that color is brilliant and various. We have lots of tropical plants that come out into the garden in the summertime, and they are bright and colorful. We enhance that with annual flowers that are in bloom at various times during the season. So someone entering the garden, let's say at the end of April or the beginning of May, they will see colors, textures, sizes that are different from someone coming in the middle of July. And the idea that we start at the entrance to the garden and we follow a pathway that is designed to create an illusion that you are traveling farther than what you really are. So the path is not a straight line, it's a curved line, and there are many switchbacks in the line, so that by the time you get to the tea house, you may feel like you have walked a quarter of a mile, when in fact you may have walked 100 yards. It's that kind of thing. And all of that is an important part of preparing a guest for entering the tea house, because we want you to slow down. Not just your pace, but we want your metabolism to slow down.
Mm.
We want you to be relaxed and rested by the time you get to the tea house, because you're going to enter a space which is undecorated, except for the utensils that are going to be used, with a kettle that is heating water to make the tea. There is a scroll and there are flowers, but that's basically it. And you sit on the floor and just kind of sink into the moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful.
That's a rather long elevator talk, but
At a loss for words because I'm actually going back to the experience. And now that you mention it, it did seem like a long walk to get to the tea house, but it's not that far. So I can see how each step that I took, I was going deeper into relaxation.
yes, and for most of that walk, you are walking on the earth. But at the very end, the earth kind of disappears and you are asked to walk on flat stepping stones, which are going to slow you down even more because, physically, you don't want to twist your ankle or anything like that. So it slows you down. And there is one curve in that final movement toward the tea house where you actually lose sight of the tea house. So it disappears from your view, and it only comes back into view when you pass a certain point on that path. And it's almost as if you are even further away
Wow.
than what you really are.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. Can you speak to how would you explain, and you did a little bit, but how would you explain the intention part and what is intention and how can we be more intentional when we're not in a serene place? So maybe even if it was making a cup of tea in the morning, how do we bring intention and mindfulness into that?
Okay, that's really a good question. That leads me to one of the points I was hoping I could make. There are three sort of Buddhist concepts that are a part of our practice, and they all impinge, intentionality. And the three terms are mu, ma, and zanshin. Mu is emptiness. And in the Buddhist tradition of practice, of any practice, the mind has to be empty and it cannot be filled with something other than what the immediate focus is. And one of the things I say to my students very early on is that your mind has to be full of emptiness. And it is that emptiness that, for example, allows me to go through those 150 steps or whatever there are without any kind of mental awareness of what I'm doing. It is my muscle memory and the intentionality of each movement carries me forward and brings my guests closer to me. So that is mu. So that is a state of mind. Ma is the space between. For example, if I move a utensil from one position to another, there is space between, and I move it with that in mind, that I am inhabiting a new space between the original and the new space. But it doesn't end there. There is a third component, and that is zanshin, which is a follow through. So I may pick something up from point A, lift it, and move it to point B. But when I put it down, that is not the end. There is a follow through. I will use my breath to draw my body back from that position, and then it ends. So that it's not just like, oh, I'll move from A to B. Bingo, and it's over. No, there is that intentionality in each movement that is significant. And we move things, we move utensils to make it more convenient for us to prepare the bowl of tea that we will serve to you as the guest.
Wow, yeah, that's excellent and learning a
Thank
lot
you.
with this for sure. Can you talk about the difference having been on both sides of the house, if you will, or of the fire, heating the tea? Um, what's how does the experience differ between the server and the guest, would you say?
Well, it's kind of hard to say, unless you are actually inhabiting one of those positions. But the guest hopefully will feel that what is being performed or presented by the host is for them and for them alone. And that, even if you and Tara were to come back, it would be a totally different experience. But my intention doesn't change. Your experience may change. My experience will change, but my intention won't change.
Well, how do you keep such like passion about this after having done it for so long and so many times? When you speak about it, when you're describing it, it sounds like it's just so important to you now, as if you had just became a teacher. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, when I first started my practice 30 years ago, I had no idea, what I was getting into. I just was in the process of building the tea house, and I didn't know anything about tea. And when I discovered that there was a program at LaSalle University in Philadelphia that was open to anyone, you didn't have to be a student there. On Saturdays, you could go and learn. And when I took my first few lessons, I had no idea, how far I would go or what it was even going to be like. And as I may have mentioned to you when you were here, we refer to what we do as chado, the way of tea. And the way is simply a pathway. We enter the pathway, and it's an infinite pathway, just as our life pathway is an infinite pathway. And we can proceed along that pathway as long as we choose to. Some places there will be obstacles where we say, do I really want to go on with this? And so the obstacle stops you. And you say, I've had enough. I don't really want to go any farther. But you can step over those obstacles and continue on your pathway. So I've been doing that, and I spent so much of my life in education as a teacher and a college professor. And I guess once a teacher, always a teacher. And now at the point in my life where I am, I don't feel it as an obligation. I feel it much more as a joy to be able to pass on to a new generation this particular interest in a practice that can bring a kind of harmony and balance to life, which I have found that it has done for me individually and here in my home with me and my husband. He is not a tea practitioner. He is an ikebana practitioner. He teaches and practices the Japanese flower arranging, which is a very different, that is called chado, the way of the flower.
Hmm.
And so it has a similar pathway, but we crisscross each other. And that has strengthened our personal relationship and allowed us to continue growing.
Pun intended, right? The way of the flower. That's excellent. You talked a lot about being a teacher and how, I mean, that's kind of kept the joy there as well. Was there somebody, a mentor, kind of a guru, a guide that you look back on and, you can study something individually, but something that is so intricate, the process, and so delicate, the different stages of it. I'm sure there was one or more people that were kind of really influenced you. Can you speak to them and some of their qualities that made them a great teacher?
My very first teacher was a Christian brother who was a professor at LaSalle University. He had done a tremendous amount of research um, looking at the relationship between the Catholic Mass and the Japanese way of tea. And he found many, many similarities. And this brought him to study the Japanese way of tea. He spent time in Japan learning, and he came back to LaSalle and started this program. And he wanted initially, in his classes for students who were students at LaSalle to see these similarities. This was his whole course syllabus. But when it came to the Saturday class, he wanted us to simply, as I said earlier, let go and let whatever happens happen. And that's so much a part of what we do. And he set the stage for me. My second teacher she doesn't teach any longer, but she is Japanese, but had lived in this country for a long time. Was married to a professor who taught at Swarthmore College and the University of Pennsylvania. Her vision was one of inclusion. And she would always say to us, yes, you have to learn all of these 150 steps. But ultimately, tea becomes your tea, and you can take it in whatever direction works for you and what will work for others that you want to teach. And she just really turned me around in terms of how I approach my teaching. There are a lot of rules and regulations that you're not supposed to break, but sometimes I think rules and regulations were made to break. And for example, I have two students who cannot sit on the floor. They have either knee replacements or have issues, physical issues, which do not allow them to sit on their legs, on their knees. And so in the past 2 years, I have taken a lot of our procedures and modified them to be done on a tabletop so that they could sit on a chair or a stool and practice the pieces that they need to become proficient in without having to sit on the floor. Now, in other circumstances, that would not be allowed. But, as my teacher said, it's your tea. So I don't feel that I have the right to disallow people who can't sit on the floor, but who want to learn. I just can't reconcile those two things.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's,
That
yeah, absolutely, and it's something that's but, it's I'm sure a lot of thought into it with it being, hundreds of years of tradition, right? So you have to
Yes.
these are exceptions, not new rules you're creating, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, no. They are exceptions to the rule. I mean, we still do the formal presentation, but we do it in a different position.
Yeah. That's
So
beautiful. Yeah.
so your knees aren't killing you.
Right, right, right. Well, and I'm sure that there's the adaptation and evolution of everything, and you're making it accessible to what's happening in present time of our universal consciousness. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's very true. And yet, there will be some members of our community who will almost vilify me for doing that. But, I don't think I should turn away someone who wants to learn simply because they can't sit on the floor.
Is there a hierarchy? Is there a hierarchy or structure that goes back to Japan as far as the certification and the origins of the kind of keeping an eye on, someone randomly saying that they are masters of serving tea? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, tea came to Japan well over 1,000 years ago, but the chado, the practice of tea, the way of tea, did not reach any kind of formal presentation until like the middle of the 16th century. So, we're talking about the time of Shakespeare and the time of Queen Elizabeth I, when it kind of was formalized, but it was very rudimentarily formalized. There wasn't very much. But over time, each new household head of our school could add things, did add things, so that by the time of the Meiji Restoration in the last quarter or the last third of the 19th century, a curriculum in our school was formalized so that all students in our practice start at the same point on the path and they end at the same point on the path. Some of them can do it in 10 years. Some of them take longer. I don't know anyone who has taken less time than 10 years because we have two seasons in tea, one which runs from the beginning of November until the end of April. And then the summer season begins the beginning of May and goes to the end of October. And although we have many different ways of preparing tea, they are prepared differently in each season. So students have to learn both seasons in all of the variations as we progress up the ladder. And they are granted permissions to continue studying as I observe them, and they have proved that they understand and can practice each presentation, that I will order a new permission for them to proceed to the next level. It's sort of like with karate, you know,
Yeah.
people progress by the color of the belt that they wear. We offer these permissions. They are scrolls that are hand done with the Japanese calligraphy, and there's a big presentation that they receive these scrolls, which allow them to continue their practice.
Excellent.
That's beautiful. I love that. It really speaks to the richness of the tradition and how you're keeping the lineage alive. It's not a weekend course to, get your certification. You're really ensuring the quality and the true essence of it. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. And it has to be visible, and for the most part, most of what we do is orally transmitted.
That's like I said, keeping the sacredness of it alive is so beautiful. As a academic, you might have a more than one, but I love to ask people to share at least one of their favorite or most inspirational books that they've read along their journey that they'd recommend people read at some point in their lifetime. Do you have a book or two?
Well, now this may sound a little evasive, but my favorite book is usually the one that I'm reading right now.
Oh, there you go.
And since 2011, I have been hooked on the novels of Haruki Murakami, the Japanese novelist and short story writer. He is a brilliant fabulist. He creates worlds that kind of go beyond anything any one of us could think about. And his narrative style, as a former professor of English and writing, I'm fascinated by a narrative style where there are typically at least two different plots that are parallel, but over time, the parallel lines begin to curve. And at some point, they come together. And right now, I'm reading his latest novel, which is called The City with the Uncertain Walls. And it is like the others. There are these parallel tracks that seem to be very far apart, but at some point, I'm about halfway through, are going to come together. And I like this idea that, we as humans are on our path, our life path. But sometimes along the path, there will be a branch that will come off, and we start following that as well, parallel to the other one. But we never know. Maybe they're going to come together, maybe not. But it's worth traveling both paths at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
excellent.
just got chills from that. Two reasons. One is because this book, Killing Comma, I don't know how to say it.
Commendatore.
Commendatore has been sitting in my queue, so you've inspired me to read it. So I'm going to
That was
start
his
reading.
last novel.
Okay.
It's going to take you the first 10 pages, but you're going to get hooked.
Okay. All right. I'm excited. I'm excited.
He has a way of pulling you in before you even realize you've been pulled in.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
he has incredible translators. He
Yeah.
is a translator himself, but he has other translators who work with him to translate his works. So he's been nominated, I don't know how many times, for the uh,
And I want to go back to this two parallel like options in life because I like this because we often will say, oh, I came to a fork in the road and I had to go one way or another. But it's almost this idea now you're saying that we can do both at the same time.
Yeah,
I love this perspective shift.
Yeah,
but
but it seems counterintuitive though, so can you kind of flesh that out a little bit
well, we think
and,
of Robert Frost
explain?
as two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and
Mm.
I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. Well, that may be true, but if I'm traveling along my life pathway and something occurs that is revelatory and causes this little branch to come out from the side that is intriguing enough for me to kind of want to think about, and then that branch may then kind of turn and kind of go side by side, like train tracks, you know? And sometimes train tracks do come together, at a switching point. So I think it's quite possible to do.
And I like how it takes away this all or nothing, right? If there's some sort of a change in your life, we don't have to just leave everything that we necessarily know to do something so drastic. It's this idea of almost like you said, train tracks, like kind of navigating.
Yeah, yeah. When I say that there are like 150 steps involved in the preparation of a bowl of tea, it sounds intimidating. And initially, maybe it is. Because you have to learn how to hold your hand, where the fingers go, how far you move this, where this goes, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But ultimately, it is liberating. There's a kind of freedom that comes over you when when you can enter that state of mu, where your mind is empty and your body is just performing. It almost like the body has a will of its own.
So do
What
you
they
find that,
call,
you
oh, sorry, I
know
was going to say
so
the
no,
flow.
yeah, exactly. I was gonna say you're in a flow state when you're,
That's a
30
good way of putting it.
30 of 154 steps or 146 steps in,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It flows.
Mm.
And I was dealing with three students last weekend who are my three of my more advanced students. And we were talking about these three characteristics of Mu, Ma, and Zanshin. And they get it. One of them practices Aikido, and he said, we always have to do a follow through when we practice Aikido. One of my other students practiced Olympic Kyudo, which is the art, the way of the bow, archery. And in Japanese archery, it is a very similar kind of situation where each action is done very deliberately, but then it's never finished until there is that follow through. And it was like these bulbs went on in their heads that, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. So there is this sort of cultural interchange from one art form to another.
Yeah, can you talk why Japan? Tea's been around, for millennia. It got to Japan hundreds of years ago. China, Europe, a lot of cultures, drink tea as part of their daily routine. But why? What about the Japanese culture or way of life, or the people, or the setting? Kind of really allowed this way of tea to flourish, or is it just happenstances? Are there characteristics that kind of lend itself to the perfect setting for this
Well,
beautiful
I
ritual?
think now I'm in to some degree speculating, but I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research, but there are no clear-cut answers to this. So speculation has to kind of enter into it. But when he reached that point of formalization in the 16th century, Japan was in the process of becoming unified. Up to that point, it was made up of a series of states, and each state was independent. And there was a period that is even referred to historically as the Warring States period, where one state was trying to get more territory by war, by declaring war on the state that was next to it, and to get more and more power. And part of that is reflected in the need for focus, the need for intention. Because in order to do what they wanted to do, say militarily or politically, they had to have a clear, uninterrupted, direct focus on what they were doing. And they found that in the practice of tea, because even the samurai warriors had to learn the way of tea so that their focus could be clear and precise and uninterrupted. Their job was to kill people on horseback with bows and arrows and various other instruments.
Mm.
And they had to be clearly focused with no distraction. And tea does teach you that, because you must be there moment by moment.
It's beautiful. Can you speak to just that, not to minimize how important that was, but to switch over to the actual tea and the matcha that is so prevalent now in mainstream? I want to share to our audience and others that might listen how the benefits that it serves, that it's not just a trend. Can you talk to the matcha and what people experience when they have your quality, prepared well matcha?
Yes, well, matcha is a unique tea. Unlike black tea, which is roasted and fermented with a flavor locked into it that can last for a long time, and some other green teas that are different from matcha. They are leaf teas. They are brewed and steeped the way black tea is. Matcha is a powder. It is the leaves of the tea plant that have been ground into a very, very fine powder. And so it is not steeped, it is not brewed. It is whisked into a suspension, and you drink it rather, well, I don't like the word quickly, but you can't wait a long time between taking your first sip and taking your last sip. Otherwise, the tea will settle to the bottom, and you will not get the flavor and the warmth that the tea does produce in you. And a good matcha needs to be very carefully, I talk about it as the care and feeding of matcha, that it cannot be left out. It has to be refrigerated, because if it's exposed to the air, it will start to oxidize. And if it oxidizes, it gets bitter and it starts to change color. And as you experienced, you saw how green that tea is. I mean, it is vibrant green, and we need to keep it that way. So it is stored in a metal container that is very tight-fitting lid, and I keep it in the refrigerator or in the freezer to prevent any kind of possible oxidation. So it is important that people understand that there are grades of matcha. Some are intended to be used as a beverage, others are not. Most of the teas that are available in supermarkets are not intended as a beverage. They are culinary grade matcha. The leaves that are used are lower down on the branches. They are the older leaves. They can be used to make anything that you might be interested in, like ice cream or scones or, whatever. So long as you add sugar, it'll be fine. But we do not add anything to our matcha when we serve it. We will offer something sweet before you drink the tea, because again, we're looking for harmony and balance. And so we want to balance a little sweetness on the tongue with maybe a slight astringency from the tea. And so we achieve that in that way. It's very different from drinking black tea.
And
Excellent. Yeah.
in terms of the caffeine, can you speak to how it's not like an energy drink where you're getting a jolt of caffeine?
Yeah, you don't. And it's kind of interesting. There have been a lot of studies done about the effect of the caffeine in matcha. And the way it affects the body, which is, it's sort of counterintuitive in a way. We think of caffeine as something that really pumps you up and then at some point drops you down pretty fast. But matcha doesn't do that. Actually, it has more of a comforting effect on the body, a relaxing effect on the body. That, yes, there is caffeine in it, but there are many other phytonutrients that are not necessarily a part of, say, black tea that, kind of interact with the caffeine and sort of mediate the effect that the caffeine might have on the individual.
Upon meeting you, it's evident, that you have a demeanor, a presence, a wisdom, right? And like there's an aura almost. If you're unable to perform the ceremony for travel reasons, work, sickness, injury, do you feel some kind of way? Do you lose temperament? Do you peace of mind that you have? Do you become more anxious? Do you, just feel off? Is there a certain amount of time where you go without maybe being involved in a ritual where I need to get back there and I need to serve, I need to teach someone? How long can you go without being away before maybe the energy starts to dissipate and you need to kind of get fulfilled again?
Well, that's really kind of an interesting question because the last couple of months of 2024, we were so booked here with people coming for demonstrations and then, kind of balancing that with my students who also come here for lessons. I was kind of teed out by the end of the year. And the first couple of weeks of January have been relatively quiet. And it's been kind of nice because now I am able to kind of look ahead and kind of like planning for upcoming things. I don't feel as rushed as I was feeling near the end of the year. But there's not a day that goes by when we don't get requests for demonstrations. And we have bookings through May of this year already. Many of them here, but we're also going to be at various offsite locations. At the end of February, we're going to be at Rutgers University in Piscataway, that campus that's in Piscataway. But, people have found us. And let me just add this. You may find this as well with the work that you do. COVID was a terrible time. It was a horrifying time. It was a fearful time. But I think something good came out of it. It was a need that people found for a more meaningful experience, more meaningful life experiences.
Mm.
I always compare it to other than going to the mall, and people have become very interested in Far Eastern culture. And one of the things that interests them is this sense of harmony, respect, and tranquility, which come through the presentation of the Japanese wave tea.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I think that, a lot of, people are waking up or expanding their, essence, consciousness, because when you block out some of that noise, as you do at the tea house, right, you can
Mhm.
get in touch with that inner voice that says maybe the way that I'm living is not the best way or true or my nature. And so I do think COVID, as well as challenging of an experience it was for many, and definitely recognizing that it was a time for people to take a look and see something's off. Something's not right. And so
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
agree.
No,
I
no,
agree.
yeah, I think that's true. And people come here. A lot of them have no idea what they're in for. They just heard that term, the Japanese tea ceremony, and it sort of sounds maybe exotic, or something like that. And they come and they sit in the tea room. And as you know, there's a road right outside our tea room that is rather heavily trafficked because it goes to the Air Force Base, McGuire Air Force Base. But when you're in that room, it's like all outside noise disappears. And it's like white noise, it's kind of there
Yep,
in the background,
exactly.
but you're not really hearing it. You're not listening to it. You may hear it, but you're not listening to it.
And that's so interesting that you say people don't know what to expect, which is great, makes it exciting, but they don't know what to expect because they haven't had a lot of it. They haven't had a lot of peace or harmony or tranquility. So whether you just go for a lovely afternoon, a healthy, fun, safe thing to do, or you have a transcendental experience, it's a win-win.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And last year in the spring, we had a family of 6 people drove down from Albany, New York to experience,
Wow, yeah, that just shows that, it's not just a niche. I mean, there's like Tara said, there's so many, um, benefits for so many different kind of people. One of the things that I would love to, touch on before we wrap things up is there's a lot of giving involved with you're doing. There's so many areas we could have went with this. The energy, I really had wanted feel a little remiss about that. But there is the energy of you providing, teaching, presenting, serving, educating your guests. How does Drew Hanson get some of that back and recharge? Are there some non-negotiable things that you have to do every day or every week to keep things balanced where you replenish it? Meditation? Is there, some kind of reading, right? Journaling, exercise? Is there some, research that you do? What do you do to take care of yourself as well?
Well, I do a lot of those things. But for me, my reward at the end of a presentation is looking at the faces of my guests. And, I say, and I mean this sincerely, I am there to serve with no expectation of return. So, you know, unlike if we go to a dinner party, for example, and at the end, oh, how delicious that was. May I have the recipe for that? Blah, 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 blah. I don't need that. I don't want that. I want to look at your faces and I want to see what I see. And sometimes I see nothing, and that's okay. But sometimes I see a kind of satisfaction, a kind of serenity almost that was not there when you first sat down. That's my reward.
Well played, sir. Well played. A
We
great answer.
can't end with anything more beautiful than that.
Absolutely not. Yeah, we could go on for a while. Pleasure meeting you over the course of these weeks, and we'll definitely have to do this again. Before we sign off, where can people find out more about Bokakuan and how they locate the house? How can they set something up? And maybe a little preview of what to expect when they get there.
Okay, we have a website, njgreentea.com, which is kind of easy to remember. And it will give you some information about the tea house. There are some photos also of various presentations that we've done. You get a little bit of the garden as well. And there is a contact us form that people can fill out and say, and I get it, and I will respond well, not almost immediately, but within a day. And we work from there. When people want to come, we have to work on calendar and see when we can fit it in. And then we set it down. There is a charge for the demonstration, but it doesn't seem to bother people, that there is a charge for this. But, you get a sense of, that sense of walking through the garden, which is very soothing. And if you're lucky, as I was a week or so ago when I had people here, we have a bald eagle, a husband and wife bald eagle nest in one of our trees in our backyard. And it's the third year that we've had them. And when the guests were here, one of the eagles flew up into the nest and they actually got to see the bald eagle landing in its nest in our backyard. And, little elements like that are really kind of wonderful. You can't plan them, of course, because the birds do what they want to do. But anyway, there is a sense that from the moment we start out from the house through the garden, things get quieter and quieter, and your body slows down. And that is really good.
Love it.
So
Excellent.
go to
Yeah.
edjgreentea.com and
Can't wait.
contact us.
Can't wait.
You had us kind of just like hypnotized for a moment.
Like I said,
I
I can't
mean, it
about it.
just listening to this, you just your presence and your how you guide us and the listeners through the visualization of the experience. It's just that's a great sales pitch in itself, right? It's really getting me excited to go back, and I know we'll include the link in the show notes, and I'm sure anyone that's local that's listening is definitely highly recommended. A great experience for Tara and myself. And thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure to work with you. And
All right,
anytime you want to come back, just let me know.
Absolutely. We have been joined here by Dr. Drew Hanson and learning all about chado, the way of tea, and the Japanese tea ceremony. So, again, it's been a pleasure, Dr. Hanson. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. We appreciate you being part of this community. For more resources, insights, and ways to connect, head over to youroneself.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and Overcast. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep aligning your mind, body, and spirit, and peace, love, and self-discovery.